in tomorrow's Middle East, China will be your most and the biggest competitor.
Firstly, thank you so much for joining. It is absolutely an honor to have you on the show. So, why did you choose to join the IFS?
Well, I always, number one, love to travel. That was one of the things. And second thing was that I love to meet people, see new places, interact with new cultures. And I thought that the Foreign Office at least provides you that platform to begin with. Secondly, I also thought that I liked something like outgoing personality in a way. I prefer to meet a lot of people, make friends. And so that comes as an advantage. And lastly, I must say that I also like to learn languages, right? So they also helped a great deal. And as you know that in foreign countries, when you travel, especially in some places where people don't speak that language, and if you can speak or even try to speak that language, you can make an immediate connect with the people. As such, we Indians are used to many languages. So from our point of view, it's a very good thing, so I thought that was a good fit. And then lastly, it was all luck that I got into it. I wanted to, but eventually if you make it a service that you like, then nothing like it. And there is a lot of luck plays a great role.
What was your experience learning new languages and how many languages did you manage to learn?
Well, I mean, among the Indian languages, I can speak Bengali and Punjabi, right? And because I was posted in Bangladesh also. And then apart from Hindi or Sanskrit, we studied in our school. But among the foreign languages, I did pick up, formally I studied Russian, French, and Spanish. And then when I was posted in Arabic countries, I picked up a little bit of Arabic, not that much. But by then, I think that my patience was going out exactly because then the languages tend to, create across languages you start talking.
Can you share some anecdotes from your years in service?
What kind of anecdotes would you like to?
Some memorable ones.
Well, one of the memorable ones I can say about my first posting. When I went to Ivory Coast, it's now called Cote d'Ivoire, means in French, it's Coast of Ivory, basically, and it's West Africa, a posting there. So when I arrived there in the beginning, I went to get my baggage cleared, right? And then the customs department, there were a lot of people who were sitting there. And as you know, the Africans are really great people, And so they were talking in French and I knew French. So I was able to converse with them. And suddenly one of them, and all these people are very open and they talk about, and they love football, like soccer. So they start talking, what about India? Why isn't India in the World Cup or anywhere like that? So I was just looking for some decent answer to give or to cover my head in shame. But then suddenly other guy there, he started saying, and he said, oh, you don't know, he's telling the other guy, you see, the Indians know magic. And that is, in one game, they made 100 goals. And since then, they have been requested not to contest and not to participate in the World Cup or other cups. So I kept quiet. I did not utter a word. But then I started thinking that how did they get this anecdote? Like, you remember that Dhyan Chand, when he was in the hockey, in the 30s, 40s, he had made some large number of goals, right? And he was called magician with his ball. So then several sticks were changed around him. So that's how the story goes around and how it gets converted. But I was able to do the face saving there. So that was a very interesting episode, which I learned in the very beginning of my career. So you got to be careful about things that you do. And then other thing I can tell you is that when I was the same place, I had gone to, how much time we have, 30 minutes or?
30 minutes.
Yeah. So I went to there, and then I was a vegetarian, right? And a place like that. And so I was driving into the interior of the country, and I felt hungry. So I uh, got off at near one place where there's a shacked little restaurant was there. So I asked them, I said, do you have anything vegetarian? They don't know what vegetarian is. There was no clue, right? So I asked them, I said, can I go to the kitchen and make it? They said, okay. So I went inside and I took little mutter, which is called petit pois, and little tomato, and just made for myself, and took a bread and ate it sitting outside on the bench. And then suddenly a lot of people started coming from the village to see that who is this queer person is. And then they started asking me that you don't eat meat. I said, no, I don't eat meat. No, you don't eat chicken. No, no egg, no nothing. So their faces were falling, you know. And then suddenly, you know, they said, one of the old man asked me, so then you must be eating the human flesh. Because there was a tribe in that place which would only eat that, nothing else. So so you get those kind of things. There are plenty of them.
So what are some stereotypes about African nations which you found to be untrue when you visited?
Well, I mean, very often, you know, in India, you think that it's very scary, there is a law and order problem, and you think that there might be violence or things like that. Of course, there are. I mean, like in India, we have same way. You have the same kind of problems everywhere. But for example, Nigeria, you know, there people say that, okay, I mean, there is violence, law and order problems and all that. But I think that Indians have been there for 3-4 generations, right? And when I went there, I had a great time. I mean, in India today, nobody wants to say good morning to you when you're going in the morning. Everybody wants to save their faces to the other side. Even among the relatives, that people don't greet you. But when I used to go in the morning, walking, jogging, and all that, you know, I would see they will just greet you. Good morning, sir. How are you feeling? And how's family? How's this? You know, they're very warm people. And I've been very fortunate to have made a lot of African friends. And in my university in JNU also, we had a lot of Africans who were my friends. So the stereotype is generated because of ignorance, right? And that is something that only can be cleared once you are there.
How does Africa and West Asia view India?
Well, both Africa and West Asia really like India a lot, and the Indians more so. The Indian culture, Indian civilization, they feel very connected. And as you know, Africa, let us say, if you know this, geographically, it used to be one continent at one time, many, many millions years ago. And then we still have a lot of African tribes who have settled here, and they came during the Middle Ages. And some of them even ruled India for some time, you know, certain parts of India. So, but what happens is, and then the Indians were taken, a large number of Indians who went to Africa, went as bonded labor by the British, by others, you know, in different plantations and the places to work there. And eventually they assimilated in the society. And then when the time came for, you know, getting, I mean, India became independent. At that time, India took upon itself the task of becoming a voice for the underdeveloped or the developing world. And that's when India was instrumental in helping them gain their freedom. And so that became a very major thing. And then they realized that India, of course, is a country which does not have an axe to grind, which is a country which has gone through similar experiences, will help. So till today, we have the same kind of policies that we follow towards Africa, mainly because Africa is still quite a few, it's a rich in many parts, poor in many parts, like it's that story. So there we give them a lot of assistance by way of capacity building. We train them, thousands of scholarships are given there. We create the infrastructure, help them, you know, run themselves. So that's the kind of thing which gives you a better, like I would not put words of power per se, but you can say softer influence of India, which has further regained us a lot of respect. Likewise, same way the Arabs. You see, Arabs have been part of our history. In the medieval history, the Arabs and the Persians and everybody was there. So they are very much used to. Indian language has a lot of words in Arabic and Persian. And, you know, for example, Indian rupee was the legal tender in Kuwait until 1970 and several other countries also. There are temples, Indian temples, for 200 years old there. There have been millions and millions of Indians who are living there. And Indians have enabled the growth of these countries, right? So they like India as Indian, as a harmless people, great opportunity today. India is a great economic opportunity. They look towards India. Of course, after the 70s, when they really got oil and they became very, very rich, they started looking towards the West. But that does not mean, of course, religion is a major part which plays, especially in the Middle East. And that is the reason you would find that until about after Mrs. Gandhi, we did not have major high-level visits to West Asian countries mainly. And the reason for that was because India thought that, oh, they're very close to Pakistan. But this has changed.
Considering China's increasing involvement in West Asia, should India also concentrate more on the West Asian placement?
India already does. You see, the difference between India and China is that China has to make efforts to get in there, right? And which it is doing through the economic cloud for last many years. It has deep pockets, but it has been very consistently working on it. India has worked more on the P2P level, right? We still have the largest trading partner. For example, UAE has been our second, third largest trading partner for years. We have thousands of Indian companies there. We have more than 9 million Indians there who are remitting about $60 billion. But what has happened is our relationship on a bilateral basis has been quite good. They are very important for our energy security, right? We import about 70–80% of our oil and gas from there. They are very important for our food security because a large amount of fertilizer and inputs are being imported from that area. So it's extremely important now for maritime security, for our trade, because of the region, the Strait of Hormuz or Bab al-Mandab. So all that area is extremely important for us. If piracy happens in that area, that is very important for us. So India has been working closely, and I would say that last 4 or 5 years since Prime Minister Modi really tried to think of a policy. They call it Think West policy, but I presume that it is more Act West policy because we did not have visits. He has gone to some countries 3 times, 2 times. He's been given awards by nearly every Muslim country in the region. And so our relations bilateral level are very much. But we are still, I think we have to think a little more in strategic terms and in regional terms, basically, more than the bilateral, whether through GCC or Arab League, or we have some kind of innocuous MOUs, they don't deliver that much. So I think we have to look at it from that perspective. India has already dehyphenated its policy vis-a-vis Israel and Palestine because until, Palestine used to be a major issue as far as India's interaction with the Arab world was concerned. But now, today, it's a bit of a change. They understand that India has its own compulsions. But I agree that in tomorrow's Middle East, China will be your most and the biggest competitor.
Can you explain the Israel-Palestine case for us and India's stand on the same?
Well, as you know that Israel was created in 1948 after Holocaust in different parts of, especially Germany and some other parts of the West after the Second World War, and a lot of them were brought back. And so it was decided by the United Nations and by the British, who were the then colonial power, that we should have a state for Israel, right? And so it was created out of the land which was called Palestine at the time, right? And so naturally the Arabs were not that happy about this. And so, of course, one has to go back. It's a 100-year-old problem, not only 70. It's even before the Balfour Declaration of 1917, whether we take it, or the Arab peace plan, whatever the Arab distribution plan which was done. So the West Bank was with Jordan and all. They were all. This was not a state per se in the modern sense of the term, because it was all under the protectorate of the British. But the British, has what they have done between India and Pakistan, they did exactly the same. They divided it out of that. And so 1948, this was created. India did not recognize in the beginning, as you know. We only recognized in 1950. So then the first war took place between Jordan, Egypt, and Syria, and Israel. And Israel won some part of it. But then 1967, again, Second War happened for 6 days, where Israel really decimated all these countries and took over large part of the so-called Palestine or West Bank under its control. And then third war was in 1973, right? Those were the major wars between the Arabs and the thing. In the meantime, Israel had peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan, right? The two countries. They are like cold peace, I would say. I mean, nothing much has happened, but of course they live with each other decently without going to any war. So what has happened is that the Palestinians over time have been disenfranchised from their own land. So they started the movement, which was called the Palestinian movement for it. Fatah was the party, which was Yasser Arafat's. So they took all kinds of measures, including I would say, terrorist, extremist measures against the Israelis, and intifadas happened. Then the war, so eventually what we have seen is that over time, the Israeli governments have consistently, under the garb of maintaining their own security, have taken over more and more territory and by creating settlements. So they have brought Jews from all over the world, started settling them in that land, and therefore the Israelis, the Palestinians, after the Camp David Accord and Oslo Accords, have a part in Ramallah, and then the Gaza was in 2006 was given to them. And so today what we have is a situation which is that the Palestinians don't have their land, they don't have their freedom, right? And they are fighting for it. But at the same time, they are using some means which the Israelis don't like. And therefore, the Israel has become one of the strongest state in the Middle East. Technologically, it's a nuclear power, and therefore it can decimate them anytime. But what has happened is that over time, we have seen that Arabs who used to support Palestinian cause a lot, financially and otherwise, it was the basic premise of their policy. They have become tired out of it. And so what we see is that Palestine is not getting the same kind of support that they used to get from their Arab world. And Israel has taken the benefit of it. As you know, through Trump's time, there was Abraham Accords were signed between Israel and UAE, between Israel and Bahrain, Morocco and Sudan. So now there's sort of normalization taking place in one place. And most recently, we have seen the war between Israel and Hamas, which lasted for 11 days, which was the fourth war. So the situation is like this, that the Palestine is not at peace with itself because it's a divided, politically divided, and it is not at peace with Israel because Israel also doesn't want it at the moment. So therefore, the USA is the only country that can predicate that. We have something called Quartet, which is USA, Russia, European Union, and UN. So these four were mandated to bring about a statehood for Palestine. India follows the policy of two-state solution, living by side. Now the question of Jerusalem is there very much. Jerusalem, as you know, is the holiest city. And in that, all the three Abrahamic religions, for example, the Al-Aqsa Mosque of the Muslims, there is this Wailing Wall at the Temple Mount for the Israelis, and the Jesus Christ. So all three of them, all three religions, which are Abrahamic religions, this is the holiest place. And so East Jerusalem was supposed to be the capital of Palestine, and the West Jerusalem to be part of Israel. Now, Trump one fine day decided that he will shift his embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and wherever the embassy is, that becomes the de facto capital of the country, right? So he changed the whole complex of the thing. Likewise, he decided to give Golan Heights from Syria to Israel. Now, so those are the kind of problems which needs to be addressed. And India believes that there should be a dialogue, number one. India has good relations both with Palestine and with Israel. It's a very strategic partner for India. And we have stood in support both financially and morally and at the international organizations and everywhere for the cause of Palestine all through. But we have dehyphenated our policy as far as Israel and Palestine.
So what is something about the IFS which outsiders do not know?
Well, outsiders think that it is diplomacy is protocol and alcohol, which is not true. It's a lot of hard work. And secondly, the diplomacy is not only issuance of visas, because most people think that embassy means just the visa. or the consular passport service if you're outside. There is much more to it. Every embassy has an ambassador. Under him, there is a deputy ambassador. There are other officers. There are wings like education, like we have ministries. We have the education wing. We have political wing. We have commercial wing, trade, economic diplomacy, like consular passport wing. Then we have cultural wing. So the different kind of work is done in the embassy, all kinds. So that's what most of the people don't know about this foreign service. Plus, it is about building relationships, preventing wars, preventing conflicts. That's the job of the diplomat and the diplomacy is. While serving your country's national interests.
So what can India gain from the African nations?
Why should we think in terms of India gaining? It should be a mutually sustainable relationship. India has not believed that, of course, we serve our own. If Arab world has oil, we buy that, right? And then we try to develop into a more strategic partnership which is mutually beneficial. Similarly, India has actually been providing a lot of assistance, billions of dollars in assistance for projects in their country so that they become themselves stronger. And Africa is definitely the next biggest opportunity in the world. You know, after the 2030, 2040, I firmly believe that it will be an Afro-Asian century. So Africa has a strategic, it has great human resource, it has a great natural resources, which India needs. For example, from Nigeria alone, we are buying 12% of our oil requirements, right? So then there are diamonds and all kinds of things that India needs. But what the African wants, that is what is most important. And that's what our policy now is. We are saying, and what we say, and recently, if you remember that in 2017, I think Prime Minister Modi had gone to Kampala, Uganda. And that is where he first time spoke about his 10 guiding principles. The biggest principle was Africa for Africans. And what do you want, we stand with you. So they have to identify the requirements. And then in the process, I believe that it's a mutually beneficial relationship. And so that's what we are striving at.
What is the most challenging situation you've faced in your career as a diplomat?
There are many, but I can mention two. When I was in Nigeria, suddenly we heard the news. Nigerians loved Indians, you know, there was no problem. Of course, occasional incidents used to happen. But suddenly I heard that an Indian has been kidnapped in the Delta, where they have all the oil facilities involved, along with an Italian and a British. So we did not know what to do. Nobody had a clue about how to handle that, right? So if you go to a foreign ministry, they have to talk to the interior ministry, they have to talk to XYZ, and time is not right. And today, as you know, the information flows so fast that you have to respond to the headquarters or to India very quickly on the updates, what is happening. And as if those guys are, if I make a call and they will release him. That doesn't happen. They are looking for ransom, you know. So it was one of the most difficult. So then I started developing the contact base and all eventually. But the interesting part was that when they heard that he was an Indian, he was kidnapped along with the British and the Italian. So he was a little heavy guy who could not walk through the ravines. So they lifted him and put him on the shoulder and took him there, you know, so like that. So these are the kind of things that getting them released, talking to them, negotiating, those are very difficult choices because our policy is not to pay ransom, not to negotiate with the terrorists or the extremists, but that has been the first time. But the life of your Indians is the most important. Similarly, when I was in Libya and immediately after Gaddafi, when he died, Libya was in a terrible state. And there was also some kind of hatred against Indians because in the United Nations Security Council 10 years ago, we had abstained from the vote to intervene in deposing Gaddafi by the Americans and NATO forces. So the whole media played it up as if India was with Gaddafi, right? So people at the grassroots level started hating us. When I went there, nobody had a clue that that was the situation. There was no embassy. Eventually, I was sent there and I went. And I was shocked to see that people on the grassroots level who used to like India a lot earlier had suddenly started thinking that India was against the revolution, was for Gaddafi, wanted to continue like that. And of course, there were reasons. So that was my biggest challenge to somehow bring that negativity to a level of neutrality, zero level, so that from there we can move on forward. So that's what one big challenge I face. Similarly, evacuating Indians from war zones, that was another very major thing. And there, I mean, it's just touch and go, like anything can happen within a short time, short window, you have to evacuate people from outside with the help of the local governments. So those have been some interesting times in the Foreign Service, when the bullets are running around you all the time, everybody flying, killing. So, and then coming out of it is good.
So, when we talk about living in the West Asia or African nations, the first concern that comes to one is that of safety. So, how justified is this presumption?
Well, not in West Asia. I mean, really, unless you go to the war zones, normally there's no problem. If you go to Gulf countries, anywhere, they are the safest countries in the world. You go to UAE, Doha. My daughter is in Doha, and she's been there for 9 years now. Before that, she was in Kuwait. I mean, it's the safest countries in that sense. But of course, if you go to a country where there's a war taking place, or something, Syria or somewhere else inside, then definitely, I mean, you can become a collateral damage. Not necessarily everybody's going after you, but security, I would say, and I don't know how it will be taken, but I think it's as secure as India anywhere else, or New Delhi for that matter.
I'll come to my last question now.
Yeah.
What would be your message for the young people of the country?
Well, my message to the young people of the country is be sure of yourself, what you want. And what you want for yourself, what you want for the country, because you are the future of the country. So whatever you are, what you think, will the India become for tomorrow? That's important. And if you join the Foreign Service, you will have a great time. It is the job that gives you instant job satisfaction. That is something I can tell.